My guest today is Bruce Bounds. Bruce is a founder of the Digital Solutions Gallery, which is a national program headquartered out of Ohio State University. The Digital Solutions Gallery is a workshop where senior IT and business executives can get together to discuss issues and future plans. Bruce is also a lecturer at Ohio State. Today, Bruce is going to look at how IT should prepare for 2025. Thanks, Bruce, for joining the show, and give us some wisdom.
I remain somewhat of a pathological observer, if you will, of the IT leadership space. You know, it's a target-rich environment, man. There's lots of things there to observe and learn through the animals in the forest, if you will. I think that in that regard, I think we can all agree that in the past year and a half, it's been a true hinge of history moment, you know, if you will, kind of a point in time where everything's changed forever. You know, it was extraordinary. It's brought many, many challenges that we're still trying to understand and address, get our arms around. And the changes that those challenges have brought are not just whimsical here and gones. You know, they're not just temporary setbacks that are magically going to go away. Many of those changes are now embedded as integral parts of this new environment that we're in, and are going to remain that way for a long time, in my opinion. You know, wishing as some might that we could kind of go back to a more familiar time of normal and an environment that's more comfortable, if you will, and in my opinion is a fool's game, because in trying to do so, that's simply going to make things worse. It's going to accelerate conditions for an even more serious and sustained crisis going forward. So, you know, as a result, through my observations, you know, I've come to arguably feel that many senior leaders are in a tough spot right now, trying to, with this materializing, rapidly approaching future, that tough spot is that they find themselves kind of teetering on a very painful edge between preparing and repairing. You know, trying to balance being strategic and looking out at the end of the headlights, or being tactically focused on issues that are right in front of the bumper as you're moving down the highway. You know, I think that we can all agree that in trying to move forward, you know, into like 2025 as a reference point, some measure of preemptive planning is always preferable, as opposed to this string of often uncomfortable, nasty surprises that I call them, that continue to suck away our energy and our attention. You know, these big adjustments often require a much longer runway, and delaying preparation, you know, means that we may not have liftoff at all. You know, we have to deal with that, which makes sense, right? But here's the problem. You know, my observations, which are supported by lots of research, independent research, indicate that generally speaking, senior IT leaders really suck at looking forward. They really do. You know, for example, you know, some research even indicates that on average, executives only spend about 1 day out of an 8-hour workday thinking anything that could be associated with strategic. You know, let me clarify what I mean by that. You know, the noted IT futurist, a good friend of mine, Thornton May, you know, once addressed this in a way that just really resonated with me. You know, he said that in order to be sustainable, enterprises are going to have to manage forces and technologies in 3 distinct but interconnected time zones, which he made easy by calling them now, next, and later. And they go, well, that's kind of general. Was it? Well, you know, of those now, which is really what's going to happen or where our focus is over the next 12 to 18 months, truly gets the vast majority of attention because organizational executives deeply understand and dedicate themselves to the current budget period and juggling all of the associated priorities and crises. You know, this is the chief neighborhood, you know, where today's typical executive, especially with the pressures of immediate crises are surfacing, you know, is applied. You know, we shorten our planning horizons and often limit our collective focus to what's hurting us right now, versus spending a little more time and trying to figure out how that possibly can hurt me later, and trying to generate some kind of preemptive action associated with that. We then ultimately tend to drive the present to some loosely articulated future. which is kind of aimless wandering, to me. I think that we really need to change the narrative. Remember that an effective use of a map, it begins by first defining where you want to go, defining the destination or the endpoint. Until that destination is determined, any questions from the back seat of the car, are we almost there yet? You can't answer, you can't credibly respond. So with that in mind, at the other extreme of next is later. And this means that, in which I really would agree that many organizations have somewhat of a vision of where they would like to end up in the distant future, like 60 months out or more. I guess the key word there is just somewhat. However, from what I've clearly seen, very few enterprises are effective masters of the forces of change or technologies in that critically important middle period of next, lying between a no man's land that kind of lies between the current budget and the imagined future state, kind of the 24 to 36 month window. And it too is launching itself towards us. This critical time horizon does require dedicated focus, because this is where the heroes and competitive advantage of the future are going to be born, so we can't ignore that. So back to the point about we're not really good at looking forward sometimes. The leading question is, how do you strike the right balance between shorter term priorities, they exist, and the longer term innovative successes that are going to sustain you in the years ahead? What's going to shape that journey? So, as I look at that, and think about it, there are factors that are and are going to continue to be shaping the future of the enterprise and our preparation for it. So I try, in my mind anyway, I've kind of boiled that down to about 5 general categories that need much more dedicated attention by executives and the assessments of the condition looking forward. Those include the first one, which is flamingly obvious, is the evolving shape of technology advancement over the course of the next, 24 to 36 months. Researchers say that over the next 3 to 5 years, technology advancements like AI, machine learning, deep learning, blockchain, IoT, are all evolving into key determinants in how businesses and societies in general are going to be modeled in the future. So I think it's important that we understand those advancements. We try to wrap our heads around them, see what the opportunities are and what's evolving if we are going to be preemptive in trying to figure out how they fit. This advancement is inevitable. Any current stakeholders that would rather just slow down that advancement, it's a loser's game. They're going to have little effect in slowing the advancement and the embedded opportunities that are going to result from that. Okay, so advancing technology. The second category that I think requires much more dedicated focus on executives going forward here, especially IT executives, is the evolving shape of the organization itself and the workforce within it. This is really an extension of the first one, the technology thing. The physical nature of the workplace has adapted to some degree as a result of the pandemic. It's adapted. And it's very unlikely, though, that all workers are going to want to return to that all previous, well, okay, pack it up, and let's all come back to the office together. No, I think we're past that. So, but yet the cost of running some socially distanced business can be expensive, especially because organizations are already struggling with lagging behind and losing valuable ground in a quest to recover kind of what was versus a new dimension of trying to capture what now is and will be. New skill sets are going to be in greater demand in this market, this post-COVID market, and existing shortfalls, I think we've seen that, do exist, and they're going to persist for a while, and left unaddressed, that can further erode market positions for some of these companies. It means, that, well, when we get there, we'll just hire the skills that we need. Not going to happen. Not going to happen because there'll be shortfall and you're going to be in huge competition for other people that are trying to run to the finish line with you. So instead, organizations, I think, instead of deflecting and say we're going to hire, need to start investing and developing and upskilling future fit skill sets with existing staff in order to get out in front of that, pending demand, if you will.
We are taking a break from our show to talk about gaining wisdom from our success ladder benchmark. Every software project has risk. This is a bet, just as much as buying a lottery ticket or going to casino. However, do you know your odds? Do you know how to improve your odds? Our success ladder benchmark gives you your odds of success by profiling your project against 50,000 cases in our chaos database. It also gives you hints on where you can improve your odds. There are only few inputs and 6 runs in the benchmark. After each run, the benchmark will indicate your chances of success. The Success Ladder benchmark is part of our membership. You can benchmark as many projects as you want and even play what-if games. You can change this or change that, and each run will tell you your chances of success. To get your Success Ladder benchmark, go to standishgroup.com. Now back to our show.
The third thing I see, the third category, which requires, I think, a bit of focus, is the growing shift from kind of ethnocentric or centralized business into a global playing field. What I'm really meaning here is that I think the COVID has served as a visible catalyst for 2020 market crashes and other persistent economic volatility, right? And as in a global place, and as pandemic effects continue now to expand on throughout the world, I think that these economic interdependencies internationally and the volatilities that can result from that are going to continue. All of this really points to the punchline here is that there needs to be some increased dedicated time by executives in focusing on improved risk mitigation strategies and the underlying infrastructures, both process-wise and technology-wise, they're going to support those contingencies. The fourth category, I think is kind of a no-brainer to all of us, is the growing volume of cyber threats and sense of just systemic distrust, that's out in the world right now. I mean, this one's kind of huge. Take it going back to COVID, for example, like closed borders, fights over vaccines, arguments over masks and rules, and all of this stuff is combined to create a general sense of distrust, I think, that is within the environment in general, and even close trading partners. Some of that may have been evolving, and then the gap is continuing to widen. I think what this stresses to me is an importance to remain vigilant and ultimately prepared, evolve with regard to what's the evolving out of that, which means the changing nature of regulations, ethics, things that are going to be trying to balance some of these volatilities going forward. As it relates to cyber threats, brother, if you're online, cybersecurity is having a direct impact on your life. Rapid innovations are taking place all over IT, cyberspace, expanded devices, interconnectivities, and all of this stuff is becoming more relevant than ever. Future-focused executives have to be really spending time looking at both sides of this automation, the white hat side, the black hat side, this automation that's threatening vast amounts, potentially, of sensitive data that we all have out there somewhere in the cloud. And as a result, having knowledgeable cybersecurity professionals who can respond to a very complex digital ecosystem are certainly in demand and must be developed and secured now, while we have still a little bit of runway to be able to address that. The last category that I would mention, I think kind of rolls all of this stuff up and says, I think that executives need to really be focused on developing a culture of active innovation and change acceptance. Part of this links back to that later vision, of companies having maybe a subsequent vision of where we're headed in the 60 months and out range. But also, do you have measures associated with it? How will you know that you're there? And moreover, are you sharing that widely with your associates so that they all see the target? They all see the same endpoint. Active soliciting, from the associates within the business. What do you think about that? How can we get to that endpoint together? Having incentives and rewards that are associated with change and innovative thinking are available and in place and realistic. I think that's all important. And ultimately, it's monkey see, monkey do here. I think that if leadership doesn't demonstrate through its own examples, its focus in thinking forward, especially in that volatile area of next 24 to 36 months, it's going to be hard for the associates of that organization to say, well, maybe I should be doing that too. So that's something that leaders are going to have to step up and personalize and make that their own mission.
Now for the afterthought. It's time for reflection on what Bruce had to say. I sit in my easy chair, sip some Whistle Pig rye, close my eyes, and pat my dog, Oscar, a black Shih Tzu. Now, the big item for me for 2025, and what I took away from Bruce is this quote. The last category that I would mention, I think, rolls out of all the other stuff. I think that executives need to really be focused on developing a culture of active innovation and change acceptance. Now, I've been working on this new software development method called Infinite Flow. It does away with projects. It also democratizes the process of IT implementation and development. It brings it down to the business unit and changes the culture from a central IT authority to a more easy place. Again, we call this Infinite Flow. Now, beyond this change, beyond Infinite Flow and software segment, we see workers are now being empowered. We see the crumbling of the ivory tower, the democratization of all workers. We see the coming of the Ben and Jerry rule. The highest paid worker will be getting 10 times the pay of the lowest paid worker. We think this is a good thing. We see multi-million CEOs, a thing of the past. And we see more. We are on the edge of equity. I want to thank our guest and our panelists for being part of the show. And thank you for being part of the show. I hope we have given you a few minutes of wisdom. We look forward to seeing you next time on Wisdom Wednesday. This is your host, Jim Johnson.